Hello everyone, this is the Disfunctional Shul number 18, and I'd like to speak today about the youth in our synagogues. I'm not speaking today about bringing little kids to Shul, that's a separate podcast in and of itself. I'm talking about youth, people over the age of bar bat mitzvah, but not people that are what we call adults. And I'd like to start with a very small story. There's a rabbi of the city here in Israel who told me that in his city there was a phenomenon that most of the youth did not come to the established minyanim. They like to go to Chabad, they like to go to minyanim that were outside of the more established shuls. And he began to see that this is a phenomenon, not just a one-time thing. And he looked into it and he came back with a startling conclusion. And that is that in all these shuls, they barely let the youth ever lead services, let alone get an aliyah. And yet, in a Chabad shul or in these shuls on the periphery, they did. And what was the reason? Because in all these shuls, there were people that were a bit older than them, and every week they had a yortzeit. Not for a parent, but rather a yortzeit for a great uncle that passed away that has no kids, and another great aunt that passed away, and people like that. And at the end of the day, these kids felt that they're really not part of the community. They're a part. More than that, when they came to shul, usually they were shushed. They were shushed when they spoke. But of course, they also saw that adults, quote unquote, were talking during services and not being shushed, because it's so much easier to shush a kid that's 13 or 14 than it is to shush an adult. Because see, a 13 or 14-year-old won't talk back. But someone that's 30 or 40 will. I find this to be very problematic. So the rabbi of that city put out an edict and said that from now on in all the shuls, the only one that gets a chiyuv for an aliyah is someone that has a yortzeit for a father or a mother, period. Those are the ones that have a chiyuv to daven, those are the ones that have a chiyuv for aliyahs. And dramatically, indeed, not only did the attendance go up, but the shuls became much more funner, because they had youth coming in, davening, using tunes that are a little more hip, and bichlal, the davening became better. I believe that we have to be aware of something that is sometimes forgotten in our shuls about youth. And that is that if we want them to be part of the shul, you have to see them as community members. And the only way to see them as community members is to get them as involved in aliyahs and leading services as you do for the adults. There can't be a system in which the gabbai says, okay, you davened 5 weeks ago, so you're now up to daven, and yet for the youth, it's sort of, well, if we have no one else. It just can't be. If they're part of the community, then they're part of the community. And as we say in Hebrew, adasof, all the way. Number 2, the youth won't go up there and start laning or davening just because they're there. They're not adults. They don't have that self-confidence. It was hard enough for them to get through their bar mitzvah. They have to be encouraged. And therefore there should be a gabbai in shul that job is to ask the youth, can you do an aliyah next week? Can you go ahead and maybe lead us in Kabbalat Shabbat? If you can't, I'll give you someone to help you. Because if we want them to be part of the community, it's not going to happen alone. As a matter of fact, there's hardly anything that happens alone. You can't just sit back and raise your kids by doing nothing. You have to actively raise your kids. You can't just sit back and expect your business to be successful. You have to actively do something to make a successful business. So how can it be that in shul we just sit back and relax and we hope for the best? From my perspective, we will not have a future unless we invest in that future. And therefore, every single day in davening, we say, and this is something that the Gemara says, upon which the entire world exists, and that is within the words of Uvalet Zion. We say, Lo yamush mipicha umipi zaracha umipi zera zaracha amar Hashem me'ata ve'ad olam. That these words will not ever cease to exist from you, from your children, and from your children's children. That's not going to happen unless A, we see them as part of a community, and B, we encourage them to take leadership within that community. So just like there's lists for adults, there should be lists for kids. And number 2, we should encourage those kids. If adults don't daven, it's not the end of the world. They will be there next week. Not so with kids. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope and pray that as we go into our shuls, we will not just view the paying families, we will see each member of the family as part of our wider community family.